Welcome to Know the Love of Christ. Welcome back. It is season 5.
Hey guys.
We are here and we are so excited that you joined us. We will be studying Malachi and then Joel. You ready to get started?
Yes.
All right, so the book of Malachi. We think that it's approximately 100 years. It was written 100 years after the release of the Jews from Babylonian captivity.
Right.
This new generation we're going to see is a different generation. I mean, if it's 100 years, the generation that was in captivity has died. Their children are now the ones that are hearing Malachi speak to them. And we could see how in just one generation, how things have changed and not changed.
Yeah. And because of the 100 years, I mean, you've really got probably 2 to 3 generations in there that would be held accountable for this. You've obviously got the children of those that were in exile that would be much older now. Mm-hmm. And then you've got 2 to 3 right in there in the adult age that are accountable. I mean, of course, we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of accountability, but if you look at when they left Egypt and when they disobeyed and complained, nobody over 20 was allowed. And so that's not a hard and fast rule, but in my mind, that's a marker right there. And so you've also got a generation of that youth right there that would be hearing this as well. So I would say, I don't know if we could say a handful of generations, but a few at least.
Yeah, a few. Yeah,
a few sure. At least that this would.
But the point is that I don't know if you could say they didn't know God so much as they didn't really care so much about, they became indifferent and
complacent
and arrogant about their heritage, about God, and about their relationship with Him, and this isn't a new story. Mm-mm. I mean, this happens generation after generation after generation, sadly.
And of course, we know there's a remnant.
Oh yeah,
of course, of the faithful. So that's, always preserved. But these people, God has given them every chance to do what's right. I mean, we see this. And we'll kind of dive into that for a little bit. I mean, a lot of people believe that Malachi was a contemporary of Nehemiah and Ezra. Like, this is all written because the book itself does not give us a date. But some of the things he wrote about were similar to what Nehemiah wrote. Malachi has extremely strong language. I'm going to give you this recommendation at the outset. If you can, obviously stick with the Bible that you have that you normally study with, but pick some that are also on what we would call the dynamic equivalent side of the spectrum that are not so much word for word, and consult those on top of what you usually use. Some of the paraphrase Bibles, you will see some very vivid imagery, like just some very strong wording. And we all know that I love word pictures, but I will tell you that it will enrich your study. And it will paint a picture for you because, in chapter 1 alone, it's jaw-dropping. It's just, I love this book. As far as dating the book of Malachi goes, there is a wide range of belief on this, and I was surprised to find that out, and that was some of our discussion before we started. There are some people that believe that it was the mid-5th century, so like 450s to 430s. Some sources put it more in the 410s and the 410s. I've even got a study Bible through, it's the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible, that puts it in the 470s, which is around the time of Esther. And then I've got an ESV study Bible that puts it in the 460s. What we do know is that it was post-exilic.
Yeah.
We can agree on that. Regardless of when it was written, the issues are still the same.
Yeah, exactly.
The issues are the same as what was going on with Ezra and Nehemiah. And I think we've discussed this on the podcast before. When the Israelites came out of Babylonian captivity, they didn't have an issue with physical idols anymore and with worshiping other gods, but they had so many other issues that they dealt with, and they turned the law into an idol. Basically, I can't say essentially, but I mean, in my mind, that's what they did. If you look at it and how the Pharisees handled the law, it's very clear that they struggled with faithfulness. That doesn't have a T on that word. With faithfulness in post-exile. And we see that because we have that 400 years of silence. When we come out of that 400 years of silence, it's still happening. So we know that that is a common thread.
But the whole point of this book is to show you, it's to show us today that if we don't diligently or purposely seek God, laziness, indifference, or complacency, or all of it can set in, and routine replaces true worship. To go through the motions is evil. We're going to learn that in chapter 1. It's contrary to God's will. In this book, God calls them out on it. Yeah. This is not an angry God punishing sinners type of book. This book does detail the sin, but it exemplifies mostly, I think, his grace and patience and love and, his mercy.
And we were talking about that beforehand, that verse in Isaiah, chapter 65, verse 2, where it talks about all day long I've stretched out my hands to a disobedient and gainsaying nation. This is just another example of it. We talk about cycles. This is the Israelite cycle over and over again. And I guess if we want to apply it to us, it's our cycle over and over again.
Yeah.
We go through periods of faithfulness, periods of disobedience. We turn back to God, and it just goes over. And we don't want to be part of that cycle. We want to break that cycle. We want to remain faithful. But we just see that, and it's a way for God to demonstrate his love through our weakness.
Yep.
But
like Paul says, "Oh, wretched man that I am."
Yep. And the thing is, there's a difference between that heart that says, "Wretched man that I am," and this group of people that are saying, I don't understand what we're doing wrong.
Yeah.
Like, how can you even say that about us? And you see that back and forth. This book is 55 verses, and it is, there's a difference between, in my mind, of course, I'm going to something weird, like concentrate drinks, like that you have in the freezer, that little thing of orange juice or lemonade that's in the freezer. Like, if you drink that straight, whoo. But if you water it down, it's actually pleasant. Which I don't think that even if this was watered down, it would be pleasant. But that's what I think about. Like, this is like judgment concentrate. It is very strong and potent, and it packs a punch. There's only 4 chapters in this book. This is extremely short compared to the last 2 seasons that we've done.
Yes, last 3 seasons.
Yeah. And then we thought Ecclesiastes was pretty short. I mean, this is 4 chapters, 55 verses, and it's broken down into 6 different, I guess we could call them conversations, even though it's not really, but 6 different issues that are put out there. And then Malachi also gives like how the people would answer, because a lot of it says, but you say this, talking to the people. And it's not like they're standing there saying that we know of.
But it's not doom and gloom, and certainly is not Ecclesiastes.
No, but it is very, like we said, strong language and very negative. But it's pronouncing judgment, and it's prophesying about bad things to happen. And it ends on a good note. Which is wonderful. We love that after last season.
This is the last book of the Old Testament, and it is believed to be the last book where God communicates with his people. After Malachi, like Stephanie said, there's 400 years of silence before John comes on the scene.
Right.
And then, of course, Jesus, who is talked about, both of them are talked about in chapter 4 specifically.
Now, I do want to point it out because I read it earlier, and it just pinged me.
Oh, yeah.
You know me, I'm so weird. I pick up on all the weird stuff and geek out. But just the writing style of this book is different than the other prophets. And so it's not out of the ordinary for Bible writing, but it is written in prose. And that's very different from the other prophets. And from what my ESV study Bible said and pointed out, which is true, it's satire, which I appreciate. It's a different vibe, if you want to call it that. It's a different vibe. And so when we read books, of course, we want to look at that. Like when we talked about Ecclesiastes, it's a different writing form than the books of law. Mm-hmm. And so we just want to keep that in mind as we go in and we read these things, because it's very easy to take things the wrong way when we aren't mindful of how they're written and how they're intended. So to me, one other thing is, it's so interesting that this is the last thing we have recorded before the intertestamental period where there's nothing. It's just silence on God's end. And he tells them that it's about to happen. And back then, of course, they didn't have copies of the writings. Not everybody even had access to the Torah and other things, you know. I mean, can you imagine? Like, they just came out of exile, which they completely flubbed after and didn't do what they should, and they weren't faithful. And you have this extremely strong wording, and they are about to be disciplined very heavily, which there's also hope. We're given hope. And so that's fantastic at the end of that. But what was communicated right before that, and then to go into 400 years of silence, to me, that's just mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. Like, just scary mind-blowing. And, of course, they're promised a Messiah, but it's not going to come in their time. I know the weight of that really gets to me, I guess.
Can you imagine hearing a prophet, because you know he's a prophet, and he's telling you this, and you got a little attitude about it, but then he's like, this is what's going to happen. This is it. Yeah. And then
curtains closed.
It's like, wait, where did he go?
Yeah.
Don't you have anything else to say to us, Malachi?
Yeah.
It's our next prophet.
Yeah. Which then their next prophet was Jesus. But that was centuries later. So, where do we see the love of Christ in an introduction to this book, or in the book as an overview? I see it in that it is preserved for us, especially thinking about the scariness of that 400 years of silence. I see it in the fact that I live in a time where God, I mean, we don't appreciate that enough, I don't think. The fact that we have the Bible at our fingertips in every single room of our home, on our phone, or on a tablet, or on a computer, on your TV now, even apps on things like the Roku. Most of you listening probably have a Bible. If you don't, feel free to reach out to us. We will provide you with one gladly.
Yep.
But we have that preserved, and we have all of this that pertains to life and godliness because God saw fit for us to have it. And so I would say in the fact that Malachi even exists and that we can see this cycle over and over this is the end point. This is like the period of the Old Testament. And I don't mean like the period like years and years, like an actual physical grammatical period. This is God saying, all right, wrapping that up. Because at the end of this, like we have mentioned a couple times very briefly, there are a couple of verses if you skip to the end, which if you want to go ahead and read the whole book, you can do it in one sitting. It's not that hard. 55 verses is not that long. There's some hope there at the end. And even with this strong wording and this harsh discipline that's coming, there's love in that. And then there is very obvious hope and love at the end. And that's how God chose to end that. Before it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like when you get onto your kids and then you're like, I love you so much. Do you know that? Do you know how much I love you? And then, curtain call, the end. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. I see it in well, kind of where you do, but when Jesus finally comes along, he's like this book all over again. Because he calls them out on a bunch of things they do wrong, the way they worship, the way how they act towards God, their relationship toward God. And so when you have that hope in the last chapter, he's like the epitome, the embodiment, I should say, of this book. But he's the embodiment of the whole. I say that all the time, but I can't help it. That's
the truth.
All right, so there you go. That's episode 1, season 5. Yay! If you guys have any questions or comments or what you've learned about the timeline or whatever, we do have email. It's tktlocpodcast@gmail.com. No, to know the love of Christ podcast.com. Or you can contact us through our social media pages, Facebook, Instagram. Also, we would love to study with you or connect you to someone local to you. Just reach out to us. We'll get you connected. As always, we hope that you will seek to know the love of Christ in your life. Until next time, bye.
Bye.
If you like this episode, be sure and share it with someone. In doing so, you're sharing the love of Christ.